All right, man, peace. So, brothers, Major League Baseball recently announced their Hall of Fame induction class for 2019. And, of course, it was spearheaded by the great Mariano Rivera, a pitcher who was, in my view, when I was watching baseball in the 1990s going into the 2000s, the greatest pitcher, pitch for pitch, that I've ever seen. Mariano Rivera, no doubt about it. There was a stretch, especially in the 1996 World Series run, where all the Yankees needed was for their starter to get through 6 innings. If he got through 6 innings, they would bring in Mariano Rivera for the 7th and 8th inning, and then end it with that pedophile John Wetland. John Wetland would pitch the 9th inning, and that would be all she wrote. And that's literally how they won the World Series in 1996. They had a great lineup, of course, Derek Jeter and Bernie Williams and Paul O'Neill, so on and so forth. But their pitching was unbelievable, especially their bullpen. Mariano Rivera is the greatest weapon probably in the history of baseball. Now, do I think that he deserved to be the first player to be inducted into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame with 100% of the writers' vote? Of course not. We have to look back into the history of the Hall of Fame voting and ask ourselves, why was Mickey Mantle not awarded 100%? Why was Babe Ruth? Why was Willie Mays? Why was Frank Robinson, Ernie Banks, so on and so forth, Hank Aaron? The list goes on and on. Why were they not inducted at a 100 percentile? And of course, race has something to do with it. Probably also conduct off the field that the writers deemed to be not befitting of a quote-unquote Hall of Fame inductee. And Mariano Rivera, not only was he non-pareil on the baseball diamond, but he kept his nose out of trouble off the field. And he was able to escape scrutiny in the steroid era. That's what makes his performance even more outstanding. The perception that he was going up against roided up baseball hitters. That's why I also contend that Pedro Martinez is arguably the greatest starting pitcher of all time, because he pitched and dominated in the steroid era, and his name has never been mentioned in connection with steroid use. Now, when we look at some of these other players who've been inducted, Roy Halladay, of course, he won a Cy Young in both leagues, both the National and the American League. Edgar Martinez, known for being arguably the greatest designated hitter of all time. He hit second or third in that great Seattle Mariners lineup in the mid-90s. Mike Mussina, the outstanding pitcher formerly of the Baltimore Orioles, the New York Yankees, who was known for doubling his loss total with wins. For example, if he lost 10 games, he'd win 20. If he lost 7, he'd win 14 or 15. Mike Mussina was a pitcher that you could always count on to win you a certain amount of games every season. Now, he was also a relatively high ERA guy, so the baseball writers must have liked him to allow him into the Hall of Fame, but he has the numbers to show that he's befitting of being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And of course, the elephant in the room is that the great Barry Bonds and the great Roger Clemens have not been inducted into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds definitely should be in. Roger Clemens is very difficult to discern because much of Roger Clemens' success is due to a renaissance that he had starting in 1996. Then he went to the Toronto Blue Jays in 97. He was unbelievable for 2 years. Then he came to the New York Yankees and was a standout as well. He went to the Houston Astros, and I think he had something like a 1.1 ERA 1 year. It was so obvious that he was on the juice. But the question will always be, when it comes to Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, were they successful just because of performance-enhancing drugs? Or did the drugs turn them from being great players into arguably the best player at their position for a 15 to 20 year period? Barry Bonds, is no doubt in my mind, was already a first ballot Hall of Famer before he used any cream, clear, etc. Well, Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman, they sat down with Mr. Alex Rodriguez, a player who himself has faced great scrutiny for his use of performance-enhancing drugs. And Alex Rodriguez is really going to encapsulate the understanding of Proverbs 15:1, which tells us that a soft answer turneth away wrath. Alex Rodriguez understands that if I stab myself with the sword, the people who are coming to kill me might feel mercy. So let's just pay very close attention to how Alex Rodriguez very adroitly handles this interview. So, of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Here's another look at those inducted into the Hall of Fame. As you see, closer Mariano Rivera with 100% of the vote. Pitchers Roy Halladay and Mike Mussina, and designated hitter Edgar Martinez. Now, Alex Rodriguez, the only player to play at least 6 years with Mussina, Martinez, and Rivera. On that note, joining us now is a 3-time MVP, 14-time All-Star, 2009 World Series champion, Alex Rodriguez. Alex, it's about time we have you on this show. Thanks so much for being with us.
Look at Alex. That man look paranoid. He keep looking over his right shoulder like the USADA guys are coming to take another piss sample. Alex is like, it's over. I retired. Stop testing me.
Molly, thank you, and great. Thanks for having me. Finally inviting me. Thanks, Max and Stephen A.
Good to have you.
Please, please, please. We want you here anytime. We're right in here in New York, and we have a little bit of an awkward 2-second delay, so bear with us here. Alex, Mariano Rivera, as I just mentioned, first Hall of Famer, voted unanimously in. Absolutely incredible. You guys were teammates for almost a decade. Talk to us about what made him so exceptional.
His consistency. Mariano Rivera is the most devastating, once again, the most devastating weapon in the history of Major League Baseball. When you have a pitcher who you could guarantee was going to shut down the opposition in big moments. When you look at the history of the playoff failures of the New York Yankees from the mid-90s all the way through the mid-2000s, it was almost always due to Mariano Rivera having that momentary lapse in greatness, because normally he was impeccable. In 1997, when the Yankees were trying to win back-to-back World Series, Mariano Rivera gave up a big hit to the Cleveland Indians. I cannot remember who it was to. If one of you brothers remember, you can update me on that or correct me on that. In 2001, Mariano Rivera gave up a big hit in Game 7. In 2003, I believe it was, Mariano gave up a big hit against the Florida Marlins. And in 2004, I believe he gave up a big hit against the Boston Red Sox when they came back from down 0-3. So literally every time that the Yankees lost, it rode on the success and the momentary failure of Mariano Rivera.
Yeah, Molly, so one of the most impressive human beings I've ever met. I mean, he's like 007. He does it all. He's like a surgeon. The interesting thing about him is he did it, while Mike Mussina did it with 5 or 6 pitches, Mo did it with 1, a cutter and a sinker, but a fastball. And, he played into his 40s, one of the most flexible guys I've ever played with. I often call him the best center fielder I ever played with. And get this,
and he played with Ken Griffey Jr. So for him to say that Mariano Rivera is the quote-unquote best center fielder that he ever played with, of course, he's being hyperbolic and he's being proverbial. But he's just trying to, encapsulate how great of an athlete Mariano Rivera was.
When he was 41 years old, we invited about 85 young people to camp with the Yankees. He had the best vertical jump, around 35.
Wow.
So he is an anomaly, to say the least.
Oh, my goodness.
Hey, Rod, could you tell us, I mean, we know, like you said, it's basically one pitch, the fastball, but can you talk to us about what made him so special? What made him so unique compared to other closers? How come they couldn't emulate him? What was it about him that he had that they just didn't?
His arm action. His arm action was so live. The hitters had a very difficult time picking up the baseball out of his hand. That's basically what it was. Even as a viewer watching the games on television, you could tell that his arm action was confusing the hitter.
I mean, number one, I think he is so unique in every way. I mean, the fact that people would pay millions of dollars to learn a cutter, he says it came from God. It just started from throwing, and all of a sudden it made a left turn, and it cut about this much, and it was a late movement. And when you're hitting, the ball actually disappears over the last 12 or 14 inches. So with that blind spot that hitters have, when you have that late movement, it makes it illegal. He was unhittable for left-handed hitters. But to me, it was more about his character. I mean, he was, he's a nice Christian guy, but he is the toughest son of a gun I've ever met.
Alex.
And he believes in doing it one way, and that's the right way.
Alex, he has the lowest adjusted ERA in the history of baseball for pitchers with over 1,000 innings pitched.
That's why I state that he's arguably the greatest pitcher in the history of Major League Baseball. I mean, Mariano Rivera is on the short list of the greatest baseball players ever, period.
But his postseason ERA, in the teeth of the steroids era, over 140 innings, and he's pitching in the AL where all the money is with the DHs and everything, is 1/3
his regular season ERA, which is the best ever. How did he become 3 times better under pressure than the best ever, who's himself? How was he able to do that? And you're being around him, what was it about him that enabled him to elevate like that under pressure?
He was gifted. It's like anybody else. You either have that clutch gene or you don't.
I mean, he was the most poised, the coolest guy. He's like 007. But, you know, one thing, Max, I'll tell you, whether it was spring training or July or the World Series, it was always the same Mariano Rivera. And I know we say that about a lot of guys. This is true. I mean, he had the most routine-oriented guy. He would get to the stadium every day at the same time. He would take a massage from the first inning to the 4th or 5th inning. He would start stretching out. He would get his weights in, get ready to go, put on that jacket. And when that man walked out, now I will tell you this, the coolest thing in sports was when those gates open out of the bullpen and you hear Sandman. There's nothing better, especially at the old stadium in front of 60,000 plus.
Look, let me say this once again. As a kid, I was not a Yankees fan. I was a Mets fan. Even though early in the 90s, I liked both teams. Anybody who grows up in New York knows that when one of the teams is championship level, you're forced to make a decision. And I was forced to stick with the Mets because when I first started watching baseball, they were the much better team. Now, in the mid-90s, when you have what they call the core four of Jeter, Rivera, Pettit, and Posada, when they came up, they pretty much transformed that team, and the Yankee fans became very, very obnoxious. So I was not a Yankee fan or a Yankee follower. But to watch that team, that is still the greatest baseball team that I've ever seen, especially that 98 Yankees team. That's the greatest baseball team I've ever seen.
Oh, my goodness, giving me chills. I'm jealous of the set right now. Notice that A-Rod's got, like, the trees blowing behind him, the sun. We're freezing here in New York. Alex, talk to me.
How you freezing in New York? You're in a heated studio. Just shut the fuck up and stop complaining.
Tell me about this, though. 2 players who didn't get in, obviously Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, both received 59%. Should they be voted into the Hall of Fame?
Barry Bonds, definitely. Roger Clemens, to me, I think that we have to look at his last season in Boston, or his last couple of years in Boston, before he went to Toronto. And once again, cats who go back far enough, you'll remember, Roger Clemens was struggling in his last year in Boston, his last couple of years in Boston. People might say, well, he was injury-plagued, he was injury-ridden. He had a 20 strikeout game in his last year in Boston, and after that, he became a different guy. He went to Toronto, and he had 2 of the greatest seasons consecutively that I've ever seen a pitcher have. And those seem to be the seasons where you could pinpoint that he may have started using something that could augment his performance. So the real question is, was he a Hall of Fame pitcher prior to his 2 seasons in Toronto? I'm not quite sure about that. Barry Bonds, we already know he was a Hall of Famer.
Well, look, Monty, I don't have a vote, but what I will tell you is the greatest single pitcher I've ever seen in my life that I played with and against is Roger Clemens, and the same goes for Barry Bonds. I mean, both of these guys played into the mid-40s. They loved the game. They both had incredible work ethic. Obviously, we know the elephant in the room, but what I will tell you is I've never seen a better hitter, baseball player, and I've never seen a better pitcher than those 2. But
well, of course, you're going to say that, Alex Rodriguez, because as you've already implied, the elephant in the room is that you've been busted for using PEDs, so you're not going to cast aspersions on them. So that's very shrewd of you, very smart.
Alex, you know, when we talk about Bonds and we talk about Clemens, obviously the words PEDs, it's going to, you know, PED use is going to come up. That's the bottom line. Obviously, when people talk about you, they're going to bring that up. What is your feeling about those who have been associated with PED use in this era being omitted from the Hall of Fame? Do you think it should be automatic disqualification? Do you think it should be ignored? How do you judge, how do you measure whether a guy is a Hall of Famer when they've been associated with those things?
Let me say this very quickly before Alex Rodriguez responds. I consider that era to be the PED era. So those players have to be judged against one another. If you were a standout player in that era, far above everybody else, when just about everybody was using that shit, I would still consider you a Hall of Fame player. That's how I would evaluate it. That's why I personally would still put Clemens in the Hall of Fame. I would put A-Rod in the Hall of Fame. Now you had other players. Some of you brothers might remember this dude, Brady Anderson. This guy had 50 home runs in 1996, I believe it was. It was obvious that he was on something. He's not a Hall of Famer. You brothers might also remember Juan Rodriguez, who played with the Texas Rangers. I don't consider him a Hall of Famer, but he was a very good to borderline great hitter in that era. Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer. And shout out to Barry Bonds, man. Shout out to my father's friend, his Army buddy. And no, I'm not MK Ultra. Shout out to my father's friend, Greg Artis. My father loves clowning this dude, one of his Army buddies from back in the day named Greg Artis. The reason why I bring this up is because Greg Artis, at least how my father tells me the story, Greg Artis was in a club in Atlanta back in the early 90s. And Barry Bonds walks in. Greg Artis is sitting there with his woman. His woman is very beautiful. Barry Bonds walks up to his woman and just starts talking to his woman like he's not even sitting there. And as my father tells me the story, the woman damn near left with Barry Bonds. So it just goes to show you, like I tell you brothers all the time, the woman for the most part is a groupie by nature, but that's just a hilarious story, man. Every time my pops tell me that story, he starts cracking up. He said, this dude, Barry Bonds, walks into the club, walks over to Greg Artis' woman, and just starts talking to her while homeboy is there. And I got to ask him how that story went again. If Greg Artis tried to flex on Barry, if he got upset. I think Barry was with a couple of his security guards, so I think he couldn't really flex on him or whatever it was. But the chick damn near left with Barry Bonds. And so once again, the woman is enamored by power and prestige. And on top of that, top level athletes, they have an entitlement where they feel like they could take whatever they want. But Barry Bonds, just to get back to the point, on the baseball diamond, that was his same mentality on the diamond as it was off the diamond, that he owned everything. And the season that he had, I think in 2004, whatever season it was where he hit like 375 and had like over 200 walks, that's the greatest offensive season I've ever seen a player have. I've never seen a player offensively intimidate the other team like Barry Bonds did, where they would walk him even when the bases were already loaded. Multiple times. Like, that was protocol in Major League Baseball at that time with Barry Bonds. If the bases are loaded, you walk Barry. We're not going to pitch to him. That's the first and only time that I've ever seen that utilized as protocol for an offensive player.
I mean, Steven, you're asking the wrong person. Of course I want them to get in, because that would mean that I have an opportunity to get in one day. Look, I pray every day that I get a chance to get in. The Hall of Fame is the ultimate place. I got 3 of my really good friends got in last night. We were throwing a party down here at the 305 for Mussina, Edgar, and Mo, and of course the late Doc Holliday. But look, here's the saddest part for me is for players like all of us, really. But if you think about Roger and Barry specifically, if you stop their career at the age of 33 or 34, they were both in the first ballot, and then the noise started. So for me, it's just a shame. I am certainly cheering for both of them. I like them both very much. They're both friends, and I'm in their corner.
Alex, let me give you my theory on this. I want to hear how you respond.
Now, before Max Kellerman states anything, we see what Alex Rodriguez did there. He took the humble approach. As I stated at the beginning of the video, he ran himself through with the sword so that his attackers would feel guilty before they tried to run him through with the sword. Very intelligent tactic that he uses to try to, garner sympathy for himself and for his Hall of Fame cause.
I think with players where it's obvious where the juicing started, Clemens was in decline steadily. I would say he was borderline Hall of Famer. If you take his Boston career, he goes to Toronto, wins back-to-back Cy Young Triple Crowns. Clearly,
that was crazy. I forgot that. Yeah, not only did he lead the American League in wins both seasons, he led in ERA and strikeouts. Like, those 2 seasons that he had in Toronto were 2 of the most dominant seasons I've ever seen a pitcher have.
That's where obviously, Barry Bonds was already one of the greatest players in history. When he came back from injury, all of a sudden his home run to at-bat ratio doubles at the age of 35. A-Rod, he was getting on base 60% of the time and slugging 8-something.
Absolutely. His slugging percentage was out of this world.
He had never sniffed that, as great as he was before the juice, right? Honestly, for me, in your case, it's much more difficult because I can't pinpoint a time he started juicing then, because you entered the league as a phenom and had one of the all.
Because he probably started juicing before he got to the major leagues, arguably, no disrespect. But that's probably when he started using that shit, was even before he got to the major leagues.
The all-time great rookie seasons, and I didn't notice any sudden and dramatic physical change in you coupled with a sudden and dramatic change in your production.
Well, he had a couple of years in Texas where he hit like 55 home runs. So, one can guesstimate that if he didn't come into the league using some stuff, that's when he started. And if he did come into the league using some stuff, when he got to Texas, he started using even stronger stuff.
Once or twice throughout your career, but you were already a great player by then. So to me, in cases where the juicing and cheating started at an obvious point and turned them into something else, you evaluate whether or not they were already Hall of Famers. So for me, Clemens is on the fence, probably yes.
I'd agree with that, even though I would probably put Clemens in, but I would agree if he didn't get in, I can understand why.
And Bonds is an absolutely, obviously yes. And McGwire and Sosa are no's. To that you say what?
Well, remember, Sammy Sosa was a multiple-time 30-30 guy. And then all of a sudden, in the late 90s, he became a person hitting 65, 66 home runs a year. So if we were to try to find the line of demarcation for Sammy Sosa between very good to all-time great, it'd probably be around 98, 97, somewhere around there, or 96, whichever year it was that he took that quantum leap to 55 or 60 home runs.
Well, that was a lot.
Marinate on
look,
that.
I think...
And Stevie Wonder could see that Mark McGwire was on some shit. I mean, come on. Mark McGwire couldn't even scratch the back of his neck. His damn arms were so big.
You know what, Max? I think it's a polarizing subject. You can't run away from it. I've taken the approach that I think talking about it is best. And
I agree with you, sir.
Look, I make no surprise or secrets. I've made my mistakes. I've paid huge penalties.
No, sir. A mistake is when you bump into somebody at the supermarket. A mistake is when you step on an old man's toes. A mistake is not when you stick a syringe in your ass, okay? You didn't make a mistake. You got caught doing some shady shit. It's okay. You confessed.
I would love to get in, but I understand that I made my own bed. So if I don't make it to the Hall of Fame, I can live with that. I would be...
Of course you can, because you got about $100 million.
Be bummed. It would suck. And I can't believe that I put myself in this situation. But if that happens, I have no one to blame but myself.
And you would do it all again, Alex Rodriguez. When you were a kid growing up in DR or Miami, wherever it was that you grew up, and you were not quite sure if you were going to make it, and somebody told you you're going to end your Major League Baseball career with over 600 home runs, over 1,900 RBIs, win a World Series, win some MVPs, and eventually they're going to catch you, but you're still going to have 8-9 figures in the bank, you say, I'll take that tomorrow. Let them catch my ass.
I will tell you, for Barry and for Roger, I love those guys. I think they would tell you on their own if they made a mistake or not. I don't know about them. I can only tell you about the mistakes that I made.
Good tactics, sir.
For what it's worth, A-Rod, you have my vote. I think you were already a phenomenal player. It would be difficult for me to pinpoint a time where something turned you into something you weren't already a Hall of Famer.
Of course it's difficult to pinpoint because, once again, that probably means that he started that shit before he even got to the majors. A-Rod was, once again, one of the, in different sports, you have teams that you say, if they would have had just one piece, they would have won multiple championships. Like in the NFL, you have the Buffalo Bills of the early 90s. You have the San Diego Chargers of the late 70s, early 80s, Air Coryell. In basketball, you have the Sacramento Kings of the early 2000s. Teams that were almost there. They were just missing a certain piece. In baseball, the mid to late 90s Seattle Mariners, if they'd have had a closer, they would have won at least 2, maybe 3 World Series because they had an unbelievable lineup. They had Alex Rodriguez, Edgar Martinez, Ken Griffey Jr., Jay Buhner, I mean, even their catcher could hit, if I remember correctly. Their lineup was just unbelievable, but they could not close a game to save their life. One year, I think it was either 96 or 97, they won over 90 games, and they had something like 35 blown saves. I'll never forget it.
You would have my vote. Clemens is a maybe, and Bonds is an obviously.
Alex, if you had the opportunity to speak on behalf of Bonds, Clemens, and yourself to make a case for y'all being Hall of Famers, what would you say?
What they should say is that they stood out in an era where everybody was juicing. So even if you accuse them of juicing, by the standards of juicing, they were still exemplary.
Well, I'm not going to make a case for myself. And it's hard for me, Stephen A., to speak about Barry and Roger. I can barely speak for myself.
Good job, sir. Fall upon the mercy of the court.
But what I will tell you is this. I mean, look, it's such a moving target. The Hall of Fame is the most prestigious Hall of Fame still of all time of any sports. And when we have a day where I have three really good friends in Mariano, in Edgar, and Mussina getting in, there's a small part of me that feels that I got in. And so I can't make a case. I made my case when I made my mistakes, and
good job, sir.
I'm going to have to lay in my bed, so I'm still hoping I can maybe one day get in.
I actually kind of disagree with that. I agree with you, Max. A-Rod is a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Of course, because he used a Jedi mind trick on the both of you. Slickster, Mr. A-Rod, good job, sir. You see how he was able to convert both Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman? First, Kellerman said, I'm not quite sure about your A-Rod, but because A-Rod took the humble approach, it convinced them that they should, quote-unquote, let him into the fake-ass hypothetical Hall of Fame that they think they have control over. And I think that same tactic is going to work on the actual Hall of Fame voters.
One of the all-time great rookie years at the age of, I think he was 21 years old, hit 350-something with 30-something home runs.
He might have been 19 or 20. I think he was actually 19 or 20 when he was a rookie.
Runs and played great shortstop. Right. And if that was already cheating, there's no way to prove it. And assuming that was clean, that demonstrates.
A-Rod.
See, they made a case for you.
A-Rod.
Why would you assume that was clean, Max Kellerman? Now you're trying to come to assumptions based on presumptions. We can't do that. If by your own testimony you cannot tell when he started juicing, we have to presume that he started juicing before he got into the major leagues. Now, if we're going to go by the presumption that he took a quantum leap as a player when he went to the Texas Rangers, look at his numbers with the Rangers. He had like back-to-back 56 home run seasons, drove in like 145, 150 runs. We can use that as a line of demarcation. But if we go by Max Kellerman's statements that he cannot tell when it started, then we have to assume it started from the very start.
A-Rod, you are. Barry Bonds
Hey, wait,
is.
you guys are...
I hold it against Clemens for being stupid enough to invite the attention to himself. That's what I hold against Clemens.
Don't forget Andy Pettitte also, but Andy Pettitte is not going to get to the Hall of Fame, but he's just an idiot.
That's, by the way, great analyst too, A-Rod.
Well, you guys are really nice. Now I want to come to the set.
Yeah, you do.
In the freezing cold. Don't come in when it's warm.
We're right here
come
in
when
New
it's
York.
cold.
Listen, Alex, regardless of what happens, obviously we're all pulling for you. You're clearly winning at life right now. We appreciate you coming.
Why is he winning that life? Because he got J-Lo? Are you serious? I mean, come on. Everything that ran through that. That's J-Lo like the I-95. Everything that been down that road.
You come visit us in New York.
Thanks, Molly. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. We'll see what happens when Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens are up for induction or possible induction next year.